Today, we're talking about something that I don't know much about, but when I learned that this is a career path of Marly Steinman, I knew that I had to have her come on. She is a surrogacy and donor consultant. We're going to hear about her journey and also how she is a quarterback for people during their family planning journey and choosing a surrogate that is right for them. So here we go. When I saw what your career path has been, and then also what your title is now as a surrogacy and donor consultant,
Yeah.
I, of course, was like, I need to know more about this and I need to have you on to talk about all the things that you do because it makes sense that you would want to have a therapist or counselor or guide in the process of surrogacy and finding a donor and creating a family. But I didn't even know that existed.
Yeah. It's hard to know. I mean, the only reason I do is having gone through the process myself and kind of all that I learned. And, even when I was treating people like in a mental health capacity, I had no idea that this existed. And it's just so nuanced. There's so much to know that can be overwhelming.
So let's go back and talk about you were a therapist for a long time, marriage and family therapist. And then, really, from your own life experience and journey, got into what you do now as a guide and consultant.
Yeah. So I was a therapist for about 15 years, specializing in infertility, anxiety, some other mental health, presenting problems. And then I had about 4.5 years of infertility, miscarriages, really had a hard time holding a pregnancy, had a hard time getting good embryos. And I started at about 33, and it was just such a challenge for 4.5 years. And finally, I was at a juncture where I was told that surrogacy would be my best option. So my husband and I went and moved forward with that journey. And then when I got to the end of it, I really realized that having had this mental health experience with my patients, in addition to now having my own personal experience, I wanted to kind of merge the two and do something a little bit more concrete and help intended parents fill in some of the holes with advocacy and, having somebody to really hold their hand through it. And so I started the business about 6 years ago and sort of weaned down on my practice and my patients. And, since then have been working with intended parents, whether they're working with surrogates or egg donors or sperm donors, all kind of under the umbrella of third-party reproduction and just helping them kind of navigate the process.
I mean, it's such a fascinating field that you're in because it seems that, surrogacy's talked about a lot more lately. And I don't know if
Yeah.
that's social media has, I'm sure a lot to do with that, or just people talking about it and it being an option in general, and also science being a big part of
Yeah.
it as well.
Yeah.
Uh, but I mean, what has the boom of surrogacy and also just donors, what
Yeah.
has that been like for you in that practice?
Yeah. I mean, I think it is true that things have been moving along when it comes to third party, and we're seeing it a lot more. And I think a lot of the reason for that is because it is something that's becoming less stigmatized, and there's a light being put on it. People are talking about it more. It's being more normalized, and also we're really coming a long way when it comes to women's reproductive health, and people really taking a proactive approach to understand the limitations we have sometimes as women, whether that's 1 in 10 women are diagnosed with endometriosis, and it's taking something like 8 years in total to diagnose, or we're learning more about Asherman syndrome, or things that make people incompatible with being able to carry a baby. And so I think because those things are kind of becoming more diagnosed more commonly than they used to, that's also, the uptick in people understanding that, third party reproduction or another way of having families is a path that they need to consider. And I think also, how has it affected me? It's been, in terms of the business, there's such a need, right? There's so many people that are coming to me that are, have realized that they aren't able to carry, or maybe they're a same sex couple and they want to have a family. And, so they work with a surrogate for that reason. And it's just, I think the need has just really grown for understanding, because the process is really so overwhelming. So there's so, intended parents will start at the beginning, and it's like, how do I even begin this? Like, what does my team look like? How do I move forward? Like, what's the structure? Like, what does it look like with the laws? And so there's just really so much to learn. So I think it's just, as time has gone on, there's been, the business has really taken off just because the need and where people are with, having this option to have children.
So just to clarify, are you acting as sort of like a quarterback in someone's surrogacy journey, or also dealing with the mental health capacity of choosing a surrogate, et cetera?
Well, so officially, you're right. It's a good word for it, kind of like a quarterback. So I am somebody's advocate. I'm going to help them gather the knowledge. I'm going to give them within my scope the knowledge that I have. I'm going to talk them through everything, just from an intended parent perspective, really just focusing on the advocacy for them. So I wouldn't say it's technically therapy, or, we're focusing directly on working through the emotions, but because of the background I have, that I am trained with a psychotherapy background. And also, I have had my own experience, which was very, going through so many of the emotional stages of grief and then moving forward with surrogacy and processing through that I do, in kind of an unofficial way, help people to navigate those emotions, help to normalize it, because it is a very difficult thing sometimes to relinquish that control, and not only to relinquish control for somebody else to do such a very vulnerable, important, the most important thing, some of us might do. But I think also it's, the grief and coming to terms with, this is what it's going to look like for me. And maybe it looks different than I thought it would. We start with thinking we're going to conceive on our own. And it's like almost our God given right as a woman to reproduce if we like. And then we step back because we can't do that. And then we go to IVF, and then we start to feel like, okay, well, maybe I can't carry the baby. And so we step back from that. So it's like we kind of get further and further away from what we think it's going to look like. And so I think it is a process. But for me, I think a lot of the reason that I wanted to do this is because I saw the trajectory. I started out feeling hopeless, feeling like it was a sacrifice with so many fears, and walking into this kind of just feeling defeated, and coming out of it with such a beautiful appreciation and gratitude that I really want to help people have a similar experience, if at all possible.
What is the main reason that people come to you and seek out your service?
Well, they have been told usually that they either can't carry a baby, or there might be a challenge to their health in carrying a baby, or maybe they have an autoimmune condition or something that precludes them from being able to have a healthy pregnancy that is carried by them. So usually people come to me when they're, number one, overwhelmed, and they feel like overwhelmed with all the choices, not sure who they can trust and count on. There's so much investment in this process financially, emotionally and otherwise, that I think when people feel like they want somebody to hold their hand, they come to me. People also come to me when they have very busy jobs and lives that they don't have the capacity to kind of like manage this every day. So, talking to the lawyers and the clinic and the doctors, and being on email and knowing what to do and when, and, doing the research and looking into the different hospitals and what level NICU, and what are the first trimester tests I need to do? What do I need to bring to the hospital? How do I find a baby nurse? Like, what questions do I ask a pediatrician when I'm having a surrogacy pregnancy? All of the things that it entails. And so they want me to kind of handle that part for them, and then just come to them and say, hey guys, let's break it down in digestible steps. Let's talk about your options. You give me your decision, and I'll kind of execute it. And then I would say the third reason is there are a lot of intended parents that work with surrogacy or egg donors, and their privacy is important, whether it's because they're high profile, or they just have their privacy is very important to them, that maybe they don't want their names out there for all the people that are involved in the process to know. So in that case, I'm kind of their point person, the face of it. It's all under NDA, and I'm kind of managing that for them so that they have their privacy. And, maybe they need security in the hospital. Maybe they need, whatever it is, to ensure that they are able to focus on anticipating their baby and having the privacy to bond and have that relationship without, press or people finding out. So kind of runs the gamut.
My gosh, I feel like that's such It's such an overwhelming to me, it sounds like such an overwhelming responsibility that you have. How many couples are you working with at one time?
Usually about 25 to 30. They're not all
Oh my gosh,
they're
that's crazy.
keep in mind they're not all in the same process. So some of them are like matching. We're just working on matching them with the surrogate and agency. Some of them are in their first trimester. Some of them are getting ready to deliver. Some are like on their second journeys. I have two right now that are on their third. Because if you go into this and you aren't able to carry, and in your mind you want three kids, just like anybody might be able to have if that's what their choice was, they'll do three journeys if they have the resources. So everybody's at different points. So some days are, maybe busy with some IPs and not as busy with others. So it ends up being manageable. But for me, I haven't gotten to the place yet where I've really wanted to expand in terms of employees and things like that, because it's a really personal journey for me. And it means a lot to me to work with people. They talk to me, they don't get a coordinator, they don't get an assistant. The agencies talk to me, the clinics, the lawyers I work with, because it's very relationship based and requires a lot of trust, And so that is really important to me. So in the last 6 years, I've kind of wanted to manage all of that. And so I usually keep it at 25 to 30, and someone has a baby and I bring someone else in.
Wow. So you have people that are in all different phases of building a family is
Yes.
kind of, um, and you coming in and having the background that you have professionally, but also the journey that you have personally.
Yeah.
What has that been like for you? And how do you, or maybe you do feel sensitive to certain times or phases in another couple's experience, but is it ever a lot for you?
You know, I think I think it does impact me for sure. I think because I'm on the other side and I have, two beautiful kids, twins that are just turned 6. I think that I am so filled with gratitude. I would say the things that affect me sometimes are and I can't pretend that I walk someone else's shoes because everyone is different, but I do feel the pain sometimes because we can't control this journey. And there are so many uncontrollables and obstacles that sometimes happen that we can't control. We're dealing with humans and people's bodies. So, sometimes there are times where like maybe somebody's lining doesn't work right and they have to start over, or a surrogate has a miscarriage, or the match breaks, or people just sometimes have bad luck. And so in those times it's like, and I usually am delivering that news, so it crushes me because I really feel like invested with them. Like I had a client, we were joking around and I was like, if this match doesn't work, like we are both gonna like get in bed for days and not come out. Like I genuinely feel that way because I've been there. And so I know when you don't have hope and you have a series of things that don't go wrong, it's really hard to keep going. And so I think in those moments, I really, sometimes my husband will say, like, you've got to take a step back. And, because I'll have tears or I'm like, but I just really feel it because I've had that experience. And I know, it's like how badly you just want this. And so, it's hard to see those obstacles. But on the flip side, I got to tell you, Katherine, when the babies come, 3 in the morning, 5 in the morning, I don't care what time it is. My husband's always like, it's the middle of the night. I'm like, I know, but they're in the hospital and she's pushing. Like, I gotta, and I'm like waiting by the phone for the photos, for the name, for
Oh.
everything. And I have chills. I'm crying. Like these moments, the moment is just that for people who have wanted this so much, everybody who is a parent wants to be a parent, but when you suffer and you struggle and you finally get there, the feeling is just so overwhelming of gratitude that those are my favorite moments. And truly, like when I have a birth and a healthy baby come, I'm just like so overwhelmed and it takes me right back.
That's such a beautiful, way to be able to kind of go through what you're going through with someone starting from choosing to go the surrogacy route to, getting to be able to welcome a baby into the world. The surrogacy journey is still a relatively new one. I mean, I heard
Yeah.
of somebody doing the surrogacy route 16 years ago for the first time, and it
Yeah.
was very new then. Still to this day, you hear people talking about working with a surrogate or going the surrogacy route for a variety of different reasons. It could be that they're not able to carry a baby themselves. It could be that they just want to have a surrogate carry the baby to grow their family. Um, what is it like? What's the journey like partnering someone up with a surrogate? Because the job
Yeah.
of being a surrogate is a very unique one
Yes.
that I
Yeah.
would imagine is also a very challenging one.
Yes. Yeah, this question is super loaded because there's so much, right? In, matching, also knowing that like both parties are coming from such different places, right? You have a surrogate who's had easy pregnancies, who's had easy deliveries, is like never had a struggle. And you have intended
Sometimes has
parents.
her own family that's
Yes,
like,
always has her own family, at
she's
least
gonna
one
be
child.
pregnant. Yeah.
Yes. And then you have intended parents who are coming to the table who have like struggled. And so they are oftentimes, and not everyone, sometimes there are intended parents who are, same sex, but a lot of times you have intended parents who struggled. And so they have a bit of anxiety and kind of this sense of like, they're not, the level of excitement is a little bit different than a surrogate might have. So, with a match in the initial stages, there are concrete things. So we have things like body mass index, number of deliveries, when someone delivered, no complications. And those are the medical parameters that the doctors will filter. And then the other things are more about like it being a right match from a perspective of like expectations, right? Because there are different types of relationships you can have. Some surrogates and some intended parents prefer more of like a transactional relationship, right? Like you said, this is kind of like a job and we're paying you. And so, and this is kind of like the surrogate will do what she needs to do and the intended parents will keep up their half of the end of the bargain, and they'll talk about important things and connect on appointments and be there at the birth and those things. And then some parents and surrogates prefer to like kind of have it be more of a relational journey where they meet the family and the children of the surrogates, and there's some level of a friendship or relationship, and it's a really collaborative process, and a beautiful moment in the birth where like both families are there and you see like two families come together to bring this child into the world. So I think the most important thing is it really is a good match in terms of expectations, that everybody has the same expectations on what the journey is going to be like from a communication perspective, that after everybody is kind of on the same page with like what the interaction is going to be. And there are specific things that some surrogates and some intended parents have preference around, like organic food or non-toxic products, or just things like that that are really important. And some surrogates may have specifics around like I want to use a doula or I want to see a certain OB, and just making sure that whether it be termination, god forbid there's an abnormality, like that both the surrogate and the intended parents are okay with what that choice might look like. And it just being of course it's important to get a match sooner than later, and that's part of what I do, but also having the right match is so important because you don't want to be in the journey and have tension on either side. And it really takes a lot of both parties to be able to put themselves in each other's shoes, because you're kind of in this mind frame where you're like, do I want to die on that hill? Like what are the things that I need to process myself, and what are the things that I do want to raise with the other person? And it's just like that in any relationship, right? Even like in a marriage, it's like what are the things that I need to deal with internally that are mine, and what are the things that are our relationship that we need to work through. And it's kind of similar when it comes to surrogacy.
What are the kind of parameters that a surrogate can even ask for or request?
Yeah. So, there are different types of intended parents. There are single intended parents. There are married intended parents. There are same sex intended parents. There are domestic intended parents, international. So, those are usually, sometimes they'll have requests around like, we want somebody who is domestic, or, we'd like to work with two dads, or, maybe they want married intended parents. So they have a choice when it comes to those things. Also, like, termination. More of the time these days, I see surrogates who are open, but maybe if there's a surrogate who doesn't want to terminate a pregnancy, if there is an abnormality or chromosomal abnormality or something that, would shorten the life of a baby, then they would want to be matched with intended parents who are also on the same page about termination. But I would say like the types of intended parents are really kind of what the main filters usually are for them.
And what does that look like for somebody who decides they want to be a surrogate? Like, first of all, how do most of the surrogates that you communicate with come to deciding to be a surrogate?
Yeah, well, some of them, a lot of them have had friends or a cousin or somebody at work that was a surrogate, and they saw kind of how incredible it was. Because if you don't know about surrogacy and you're a parent or you're a surrogate, you might think like, I like a lot of surrogates will say, their family members or friends will say, like, "Well, how are you going to give up the baby? Like, how are you going to give back the?" And the surrogates are like, once you're educated, like, this isn't my baby, this isn't my DNA, and I'm doing this for the parents. I'm holding, I'm taking care of their baby while they're in gestation. But I think typically they know somebody who's come to surrogacy, maybe, in the Instagram and social media. There are a lot of surrogates now that are doing kind of like documenting their journey. There's even kind of like influencers that are surrogates, like Surrogate Sam, and she's like an influencer and she documents everything. And there's been some campaigns to like, have a journey that's covered in costs. And, I think it's really out there a lot more. And so people are seeing that this is an option. And then a lot of times, sometimes they'll know somebody in their life, maybe a relative or a friend who struggled with infertility. And they'll say like, oh, I was going to carry for them. And then it didn't work out. So I decided I'd like to do it for somebody else. But they'll usually kind of hear about it and spend some time researching to understand like, what does this look like for me? What does this look like for my family? What does this look like for my children? Like, how do I talk to my children about mommy's
Yeah.
carrying a baby that we're not bringing home, that we're going to, share with this other family? There's a book that's really cute that's about a koala family and or a kangaroo family, and the kangaroo is carrying another family's baby in their pouch. So it's a
Mhm.
really cute way to explain it to children that like this kangaroo family was carrying another baby in their pouch for this other family, and when the baby was ready, they took it out of their pouch and gave it to the other family. And there are ways to explain it to children that they can get an understanding. And I think it's actually a really beautiful thing for surrogates to show their children, that they're helping somebody. Like it's such a lesson in like, being so generous of the heart and doing something, carrying a child for somebody, the purpose that that brings surrogates. I can't imagine a greater purpose. With my surrogate, I always say to her, like, you've really like, how can you have like done something more important than given someone a family? Because for me, without my surrogate, without Beth, without like, I wouldn't have a family. I mean, I'd have my husband, but I wouldn't have children. And what that's given me is like indescribable. And so I think that's why surrogates do it again, is because they have these babies and they see that moment where that baby gets handed to the parents and the parents cut the cord and they see their baby take their first breath. And it's like such a miracle that they're like, sign me up again. This is amazing.
How many times can someone be a surrogate?
There's no limit on the times you can be a surrogate, but there are limits around how many births you can have. So no more than 5 births. So it depends how many of your own children you've had. So if you've had 2 children, that's 3 surrogacies. If you have 1 child, that's 4. If you have 3 children, that's 2. Because 5 is the max from ASRM guidelines, how many births people can have when they're a surrogate.
Let me ask you, have you ever had crazy, I'm sure you have, but I mean, like, have you ever had crazy situations where someone has the baby and they're like, as a surrogate, they feel connected? And even though I try to think about this and I've thought about it for our friends who had a baby through a surrogate. And I've had 3 of my own kids, and the idea of, having another couple's baby grow, in your body, you're feeling everything that you're feeling. You also have all the hormones in
Yeah.
your body
Yeah.
that make you emotional and
Yeah.
make you have a lot of feelings about a variety of different things. And then you, of course, have the postpartum hormones too. But then you are growing this, baby, feeding it, doing all of these things to make sure that you are, I'm assuming you're like your most optimal health to deliver a healthy baby to a couple. And then you go through having a baby, which is
Yeah.
like, I mean, a whole other, the labor process. I mean,
Yes.
it's not like it's a walk in the park to do that.
Yes. Yes.
Have you ever had any crazy situations happen where someone just is like not able to comprehend that as you near due date or as you have the baby?
I haven't had any crazy situations where people are like, I want to take this baby home, or they're like, have a really hard time separating. But I will say, first is for the screening, they do psychological evaluations, which are really important, not just
Oh,
to
that's
assess
interesting.
if a surrogate is psychologically stable or in a place where she would be able to be a surrogate. That's kind of the first level of it. But the another level of it is like, does she understand all the expectations on her? Does she understand? Because you are right. I mean, it's not an easy thing. Pregnancy, delivery, all of these things, hormones. So, the psych really goes through like, how do you feel about taking shots? Have you thought through what it might be like to carry a baby and then to, give birth and have these hormones and have to separate, not have a baby to bring home? Like, just making sure that that person isn't just going into this, with the positive side of it, which is like, great, amazing. I can give this to this family. I can get compensation, help my own family. But they're really understanding like the challenges and what that, what the struggles might be. So I think first that is helpful. And then second, I think, ongoing, they have counseling. They have that opportunity that is covered by the intended parents for them to have group counseling, individual counseling. But I do think that there is a level that it can be hard on them from that perspective of hormones, not necessarily because they feel like they want to take home that baby, because I think there is a disconnect with, that baby not being theirs genetically and them kind of knowing that the whole time. But I do think sometimes there is a challenge in not bringing home a baby, not nurturing a baby, not kind of like giving birth and then having it be over. I think that that is sometimes an emotional road. I know for my surrogate, our twins came and she didn't want to hold them. Right away typically is the time for intended parents. So when the baby comes, intended parents take the baby, they do skin to skin, the surrogate is healing and like, just getting stitched up, whatever it is. And then after like an hour or two, usually the parents will come in and let the surrogate hold the baby, all those things. But my surrogate, for I think it was a day or two, she didn't want to hold them because she was just like, I need to like, my body needs to kind of take a step back and my hormones, and she just wasn't sure how she'd feel. Not in the sense of like feeling like that she wanted them, but just if it would feel like emotional for her. And I think that is something some surrogates do go through, is just, the experience of having brought home a baby every other time and not having that experience. And sometimes they might need some help with that, with the hormones. But I think that's a very different thing than like feeling like, I don't want to separate from this baby, or that it has anything to do with this child. I think surrogates oftentimes say it's kind of like the way you might feel as an aunt or an uncle. Like if you do have a positive relationship, is like, I cared for this baby and I really, have a connection with this baby in that way. But it's not the same as you would feel towards a child. And then, some journeys may be more disconnected completely. And it might just be like, a little bit different for them, like especially for repeat surrogates, they might have an easier time kind of like disconnecting from it. But it really just depends on the person, I think.
Surrogates undergo psychological evaluation.
Yes.
What about the couple that's hiring the surrogate?
Yeah. So most of the time, most agencies will require them to go through psych as well, just to make sure that as if it's a couple, that their relationship is, they have all the expectations and understand how it will work. If it's an individual, same thing. Really, just to make sure that expectations are clear and it's not just going into it with kind of like the high level understanding of like, okay, we'd have a baby, but really understanding like this is how it's gonna work. How are you gonna manage the relationship? Like, you may have less control. How are you going to manage that? Like, what are your thoughts in terms of termination? How would you handle that? Just kind of like understanding the expectations. And of course, also making sure that they're stable enough, their situation is stable enough emotionally, financially, et cetera. Because, when surrogates are having babies, for intended parents, they also want the peace of mind that they're, doing this for a family that is really available and can provide love and resources and all the things that a child might need.
What about if a surrogate wants to have one kind of birth and the family wants to have a different kind of birth, like an epidural, no epidural, natural, no hospital?
Yeah, so those are things that are really important to cover at match, like at the match meeting. And we cover all those things, going everything from like vaccines to what kind of birth. I would say that, like, oftentimes intended parents aren't usually comfortable with like an at-home birth as opposed to like in hospital, just because they've been through so much. So I sometimes see that be like a sticking point. But for the most part, I usually see like intended parents okay with epidural, no epidural, but they usually will agree initially that like they have the same idea of what they're comfortable with. And if there's a, God forbid, we're not able to have a vaginal birth and there are complications, everybody has to be on board for a C-section. And then who's in the room? Is a surrogate okay with the intended mother and father if it's a mom and a dad in the room? Do the parents want to be in a room? Sometimes a surrogate will want her support person, her partner in the room, or maybe her mom if she doesn't have a partner. So, those are the really important matching points that like initially are discussed, because the last thing you want to do is get into your journey and then be on different pages when it comes to things like that.
I don't know if this is like an okay question to ask, but what is the payment situation for a surrogate?
Yeah, so it is complicated because you have a couple different levels of this. So the first is they have a base payment. So that is just their base fee. It starts a few months into pregnancy and is usually broken down into 9 installments. So if they don't really get paid that base fee until they have a pregnancy. And then the other part of it is they get a monthly stipend for being pregnant. So, usually a certain amount of money a month for going through the process, because technically you're not being paid for like the baby. It's the process of being pregnant. So she will get that, as well as a benefits package, which usually, can be anything from like a doula to prenatal massages to housekeeping, to anything extra she might want for like her and her family. And that's in her benefits package, which is like addressed at the beginning. And then she'll have fees when it comes to like, she'll get a transfer fee, a start medication fee, any invasive procedure like a hysteroscopy fee. So, it's multifaceted, but the main fee is her base. And then there's these extra things that she also gets in addition. And then the intended parents also pay for her legal, they pay for her maternity clothing and, any childcare that she needs for appointments, lost wages if she's on bed rest, all of those things as well.
And then you get a fee when you have the baby.
Well, the fee for having the baby is actually the fee for like the pregnancy, and that is that base fee that's broken down. So say her base fee is like, I don't know, say it's 65,000. She'll get that in increments, 9 increments throughout the pregnancy, and it will continue after the birth, usually for a couple months. But that's the biggest chunk that she'll get. It's just broken down over the pregnancy, as opposed to you have the baby and then you get the huge chunk.
Are there different tiers, like different levels of surrogacy? Like, is there like an elite surrogate and then like a beginner surrogate?
Yes. So, I mean, it's not exactly like that, but yes, there's a huge spectrum of fees for surrogates depending on a few things. So the biggest factor I would say is a first time versus repeat. So a first time surrogate has never done surrogacy. She's had at least one healthy delivery and pregnancy with no complications, but she's never had a surrogacy journey. And then a second time surrogate or third time surrogate or repeat surrogate has typically had multiple surrogacy journeys, at least one. And so she's done the shots, she's had IVF pregnancy, she's done the birth. And so she's already been through the process. And those surrogate fees are about, I would say like $20,000 to $25,000 more for a repeat surrogate. California surrogates tend to be a bit higher in cost, just because there are a lot of intended parents in the Los Angeles area and they're hoping for a local surrogate. In addition to California's a fantastic state for laws, there are also a lot of other surrogate friendly states that have where you can get parental rights ahead of time, pre-birth orders, but California is very popular. So I'd say that takes the cost up. And then it also kind of depends on her insurance. When you work with a surrogate, you have to purchase insurance for her. You can't go through your policy. So that also depends on like open enrollment, if you have to get a private policy. So there are these factors that like make a difference. But I would say like a surrogate who's done it before, who's in California, is probably going to be what is considered your like most coveted situation.
And this is their full-time job, right? Like they're not going to are they going to?
No, not necessarily. Yeah. So just like, most people would do pregnant, a lot of these surrogates have jobs. I mean, some are stay-at-home moms, but, some, some are nurses, some work in like, an admin, some are, work in like, real estate, some are, working in, just like maybe a retail store. And some are stay-at-home moms that it kind of depends on their situation. There's a lot of women who maybe their husbands work, they're either like, maybe in the military, or they work as a fireman or police, and they are stay-at-home moms. It just kind of depends. But I would say a lot of surrogates do have careers, and this is just kind of like a supplement to that, or something they've always wanted to do.
Have you ever had an issue with the woman's significant other having a problem with them being a surrogate?
I haven't, but I think the reason for this is two things. Number one, I always work with agencies that I'm comfortable with in terms of their screening, and I know that they're not only talking to the surrogate but their husband. And then on the match call, I always ask for the partner to be on the call. So that way, when we're doing the match call, we can talk to the partner, and we will ask, "How do you feel about her doing this journey? How do you feel about surrogacy? What are your thoughts on it? Even termination. How do you feel if, God forbid, there was a genetic abnormality and the intended parents wanted to terminate? Would you be open to your partner getting a termination?" So we typically, always do that as part of the screening if they have a partner, to make sure that the partner is available and or is okay with it. And of course, there are different levels of partner support. Some partners are kind of blended in the background and don't really get involved and are kind of like, this is your thing, I'll support you. And then some partners are like, "Oh yeah, like let's get into this. Like I'm going to every appointment. Like I want to get to know the family. Like we want to be like, we're doing this together." So there are different layers of like the involvement, but we always make sure that the partner is like on board, because of course that would be terrible to have some kind of conflict there.
When you have, we hear about it a lot now, especially publicly, with certain
Yeah.
people who are high profile choosing to have
Yeah.
children via surrogates. And the people I would imagine that they choose to do that with is a very particular kind of a person who they can feel like they can trust, that will be private, that will be, respectful of the situation and the dynamic. What is that process like in particular? Because it is a very sensitive, private, and
Yeah.
personal journey.
Yeah. Typically, the way it works when you're matching is the surrogate will have a profile that'll have her photos and information, her profile, maybe a letter that talks about, dear intended parents. And so the parents will see that first. And then from that point, if it's a high profile couple or individual, before we show their photos and their surrogacy letter, we will send over an NDA. So the agency and the surrogate and her partner, if she has a partner, will send a pretty thorough NDA, that makes it clear that she's not able to share anything about the situation. Sometimes we won't send over a profile ahead of time if it's someone who really wants their privacy. They won't see who the parents are until we get on the Zoom. But typically, surrogates aren't super excited about matching somebody that they can never know who it is, just because it feels sometimes a little uncomfortable for them to like be carrying a baby and like have no clue, no relationship. I think sometimes, I don't typically do that in my experiences when I've worked the people that I've worked with. I've said totally fine if we want, we use pseudonyms for the whole process. So anything that's written, we use emails, we use everything online that is, private and confidential. And then anything we put in paper with the clinic, with the legal team, with everything other than the parental rights is with pseudonyms. So there would be no way to track, what's going on from things that are written. And then, usually the surrogate will have the pseudonyms as well, but with high profile people, most of the time, like cat's out of the bag once we're on the Zoom, um, and so at that point, everybody signs an NDA. We're using the pseudonyms, and then the surrogate will then meet the intended parents. We move forward. And yeah, I mean, it definitely has to be somebody who is okay with that responsibility. Sometimes it can make surrogates nervous because they feel like, oh gosh, what if I accidentally say the real name at the doctor's office? Or what if I so you have to kind of be somebody who's comfortable with knowing that that's going to be a responsibility for you, that you have to keep that private, just because, there are legal consequence, in the documents you're signing for sharing. So yeah, I think it's somebody who's comfortable with that responsibility, and somebody who is okay with that pressure, because of course, when it's a public person, it can feel a little bit more work pressure. And I think some public people are more comfortable, they want more of a relationship, whereas others maybe want a little bit more distance, just because of their experience with having a life that's not private. So it kind of depends on the relationship. But I would say just the most important part is that the surrogate's comfortable with that responsibility, and that also, everything is in place, the pseudonyms, the NDAs. When we get to delivery, if it's at Cedars, there's a lot more flexibility because there are specific structures there that allow for confidentiality, private entrances, private rooms, all of those things. If we're delivering outside of Cedars, like in another county or even in another state, then we really have to make sure that all of those protocols are in place for privacy with the parental paperwork so no one knows they're coming. And also, getting a private room, making sure the surrogate is private. Because the other element too for a surrogate when working with a public couple or individual is, she also has to be comfortable with the potential that, like, if people find out, like, there's paparazzi, like people can, her privacy can potentially be exposed. And that usually, it works out. But I think, just knowing that that's a potential too. And so I think everybody just kind of being on board with working together to keep it private is really important.
What has been the most surprising thing that you have learned or discovered since being in this field that you're in?
The thing that strikes me the most every time is just the magic and like the beauty of like the experience. I think a lot of people come to this, myself included, sort of just kind of like defeated and feeling like they don't have a lot of hope. And to be honest, not feeling kind of accepting or haven't come to terms with taking this road, and kind of, maybe feeling a bit of shame about that and not giving themselves grace and feeling like I should be happy, I should be grateful, I can pay for this, I can afford to do this, like I should, I want to be excited, but I'm just not. I'm kind of stuck in my grief still. Seeing the drastic change in where people start and where they end up is like, and also the beauty that can come from like these two families and these two women, or the women and the two men, or two, however you look at it, and the bond, and just like, I don't know, the beauty, I guess, is the best word I can think of those moments and that experience. Every time I'm like, when I see that movement of like going from point A to the end, every time it just hits me like, wow, like this is so incredible that like we go into this feeling this way and we come out of it, such a different person. And I'm surprised at that every time, just because, I remember feeling like it felt like impossible, not only to have a baby, but impossible to like not feel the way I was feeling. And I think that's pretty incredible to like really move through that grief and get to the other side.
It must be such a wild ride for you to be able to witness such, I mean, change within couples, dynamics, people, families, people's lives, and to also go through the range of like really low lows and then really high highs. It must be um, a wild ride. I'm sure you have to do your own therapy.
Definitely. I mean, because it is so true. Like highs are high and lows are low, because it's like I always say, like the good days are amazing and the bad days are hard, because the disappointments, and it's just all of it, like the financial investment, the emotional investment. And when you see people who've already struggled, it's like, the bad days are just, they take a toll, and, the good moments, it's like, it all balances out in the end though, just kind of, it's all about having the right team, the right people around you. Cause I do feel like this is a really like relational, personal experience. And it was for me. And that's what I hope for other people, is that they come out of it, really feeling, the gratitude, and feeling, that all the fears that they thought of, when you go into this, like, am I going to connect? Is my baby going to connect? Is this, am I gonna feel weird? And you see that like none of those things really come to fruition, and that baby comes into the world, and you see that they're yours. And you've kind of made the first parenting decision. It's kind of the first hard decision you make as a parent out of many, but that's the best one for your child and the best one for you, which is, the way I like to look at it.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much. This has been such a fascinating conversation. I've learned so much, and I'm sure it's never a dull moment with all that you do. So, thank you so much for taking the time to chat and walk us through this wild ride that you're on.
Of course. And thank you so much, Katherine, for having me and for everything that you do with this podcast and raising awareness for all the things we experience with fertility to motherhood to pregnancy. I feel it's so important.